The needle dropped, and for a moment the old man's hand stopped trembling. Then the static began, and Walter Boyd went pale in a way that had nothing to do with his 71 years. The boy standing across the counter saw it. He saw the color drain from a face that had smiled through 4 decades of customers, and he thought, for the first time, that the rumors about the quiet man who owned the record shop on Delaney Street might not be rumors at all. "That's just surface noise," the boy said. "Right?" Walter didn't answer. He was listening to something underneath the music, something the boy couldn't hear, something that had been buried for 43 years and had just clawed its way back into the room. From whatever city you're listening to this story in, drop your location in the comments below. And if you believe some truths are too dangerous to stay buried forever, hit subscribe. Because what that record revealed brought 2 federal agents to Walter Boyd's door before the sun went down. And what the old man finally told them made one of them lower his eyes in something close to shame. What was hidden in the 7th groove? The morning had begun, the way every morning began at Boyd's Records. Walter unlocked the front door at 9:42, the same time he always did, 18 minutes before the hand-painted sign would flip to open. He liked those 18 minutes. He liked the silence of the shop before the world came in. The store sat between a shuttered bakery and a tax office on a street that had once been the heart of the town and was now just a place people passed through. Walter had owned it since 1983, 41 years of vinyl and dust and the soft crackle of old speakers warming up. He was a fixture, the kind of man people described as always been there, as if he had grown out of the floorboards. He moved through the shop with the unhurried care of a man who had nothing to prove and nowhere to be. He wiped the counter first, left to right, never in circles. He checked the turntable behind the register, lifted the dust cover, blew gently across the platter. Then he made coffee in a chipped percolator that was older than most of his customers, and drank it black while the heaters ticked and the fluorescent tubes flickered awake. The walls were lined with records, thousands of them, sorted not by genre or alphabet, but by some private system only Walter understood. Jazz pressed against opera, folk records leaned against forgotten symphonies. There was an order to it, but the order lived in his head, and he had never written it down. People said it was eccentric. Walter said it was memory. He could find any record in the store in under 30 seconds, blindfolded, and he had proven it more than once to skeptical teenagers who thought the old man was bluffing. At the back of the shop, behind a curtain of hanging beads, sat a listening booth, a relic. A small soundproofed room with a single chair, a turntable, and a pair of headphones that had been state-of-the-art in 1979. Customers rarely used it anymore, but Walter kept it clean. He kept it ready. He told people it was for serious collectors who wanted to hear a record before they bought it. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Above the booth's doorway hung a framed photograph, black and white, faded to soft gray. It showed a row of antennas against a flat horizon and a low concrete building with no windows. No people, no labels, just steel and sky. Customers assumed it was art, some abstract piece the old man liked. They never asked. Walter never explained. He had hung it the day he opened the store, and in 41 years, not a single person had questioned why a record shop displayed a photograph of what looked like the loneliest place on earth. The boy's name was Eli Chambers. He was 19, a community college dropout who worked part-time at the tax office next door and spent his lunch breaks flipping through Walter's crates. He was the kind of kid who had been born too late, who loved the warmth of vinyl and the ritual of it, who thought CDs were a betrayal and streaming was a crime. Walter liked him. The boy asked good questions and listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. That Tuesday, Eli came in carrying a milk crate full of records he'd bought at an estate sale outside the county line. An old woman had died, 90-something, no family, and her belongings had been spread across folding tables in a church parking lot. Eli had paid $4 for the whole crate. "There's some weird stuff in here," Eli said, setting the crate on the counter. "Half of it isn't even labeled, just blank sleeves, but I figured you'd know what some of it is." Walter began sorting through it with practiced fingers. A Sinatra pressing, common. A water-damaged Brahms, worthless. A children's record about a singing train. And then his fingers stopped on a sleeve that was plain brown paper, unmarked, soft with age. He slid the record out. Black vinyl, no label at the center, just a blank paper circle where the title should have been. He turned it over, the same on both sides. "What's that one?" Eli asked. "Don't know," Walter said. But something in his voice had changed, just slightly, just enough that Eli looked up. That should have been the end of it. A blank record, a curiosity, the kind of mystery a record shop produces a dozen times a year. But that wasn't the full story. "Can we play it?" Eli asked. Walter hesitated. It was a small hesitation, the length of a heartbeat, but it was there. Then he carried the record to the turntable behind the register, set it on the platter, and lowered the needle. For 3 seconds there was nothing. Then a song began. An ordinary big band tune, brass and strings, the kind of thing that had played in ballrooms before either of them was born. Eli relaxed and grinned. "See? Just old music." Walter said nothing. He was counting. Eli could see his lips moving, just barely, the way a man counts seconds during a storm to measure how far away the lightning struck. The song played on. Verse, chorus, verse. And then, exactly where the 7th phrase of the melody should have repeated, the music dropped away and was replaced by a sound that froze the room. A woman's voice, flat, mechanical, emotionless, reading numbers. 3, 7, 9, 2, 6, 4. Then a tone, high and steady, like a tuning fork that would not stop. Then more numbers, the same dead voice, the same cold rhythm. Then static. Then abruptly the big band song returned as though nothing had happened, swelling back into its cheerful melody. Eli laughed, but it came out wrong. "What was that? Some kind of joke pressing?" Walter lifted the needle. His hand was not steady. "Turn the sign," he said quietly. "What?" "The sign on the door. Turn it to closed." That's when things took a darker turn. Eli stared at him. The old man's face had changed entirely. The easy warmth was gone, replaced by something tighter, older, harder. For the first time in the year Eli had known him, Walter Boyd looked dangerous. "Walter, it's just a weird record." "Turn the sign, Eli, please." The boy did it. He flipped the cardboard placard and the lock clicked, and suddenly the shop felt smaller, the walls closer, the silence heavier than before. Walter carried the record into the back, past the beaded curtain, into the listening booth. He sat down in the single chair and set the record on the booth's turntable and put on the ancient headphones and lowered the needle again. Eli stood in the doorway, watching. The old man closed his eyes. He listened to the whole thing this time. Both sides, 22 minutes. When it was over he sat very still, the headphones still on, the needle riding the silent run-out groove with a soft rhythmic click. Click, click, click. "Walter," Eli said, "you're scaring me." The old man opened his eyes. "How did this record get into that estate sale?" "I told you. Some old lady died. No family. They were just selling off her stuff." "What was her name?" I think the church had it on a sheet. Margaret something. Margaret Vance, maybe." Walter's face did something complicated. A flicker of recognition, then grief, then a stillness so complete it was its own kind of answer. "You knew her," Eli said. "Once," Walter said. "A long time ago, in a place that doesn't exist." He took off the headphones and set them down with great care, the way a man sets down something that might break or might explode. "Eli, I need you to listen to me very carefully. In the next few hours, people are going to come to this shop. I need you to tell them exactly what you saw and nothing else, the record, the numbers, the truth. Do you understand?" "What people? Walter, what is going on?" "That record," Walter said, "is a number station. Do you know what that is?" Eli shook his head. "During the Cold War, intelligence services broadcast coded messages over shortwave radio, Strings of numbers, read aloud by a voice, sometimes a real person, sometimes a machine. Agents in the field would listen on their radios, write the numbers down, and decode them with a one-time pad. Untraceable. Unbreakable, if you did it right. Some of those stations broadcast for 50 years. Nobody ever officially admitted they existed. And someone pressed one onto a record. No, Walter said. Someone hid one inside a song, so that if it was ever found it would sound like a defect, a glitch, surface noise. Nobody would ever know it was a message unless they knew exactly where to listen. He paused. The seventh phrase. Always the seventh. How do you know that? The old man looked at the boy for a long moment, and then he told him. But before he did, let me ask you something. Have you ever found out that someone you thought you knew completely was, in fact, a stranger? Tell me in the comments, and if stories about hidden lives and buried truths move you, subscribe now. Because Walter Boyd's real name wasn't Walter Boyd, and what he confessed in that listening booth was only the beginning. His name, he said, had been Daniel Hantz. He had been born in 1953 in a town not far from this one, and at 20 he had been recruited, not by a man in a trench coat, nothing so dramatic, but by a mathematics professor who noticed that young Daniel could hear patterns other people couldn't. Daniel had a gift. He could listen to noise and find the order inside it. He could hear a string of random numbers once and repeat it back perfectly an hour later. He heard the world the way other people saw it. The professor made a phone call. A month later, Daniel was in a windowless building behind a chain-link fence in the middle of a flat, empty nowhere, and the photograph above the listening booth, the antennas, the concrete, the lonely horizon, was a picture of the place where he had spent the next 8 years of his life. It was a signals intelligence station. The agency that ran it did not appear on any organizational chart. Its employees did not exist on paper in any meaningful way. Daniel's job was to listen, to monitor foreign broadcasts, to transcribe number stations, to find the patterns that machines missed. He was one of the best they ever had. They called the unit Choir because all they ever did was listen to voices. And then there was Margaret. Margaret Vance, Walter said softly. She was the voice. She read the numbers. Her voice went out over the air to agents in a dozen countries. She never met any of them. She just read the numbers and the tones, hour after hour, in that flat, dead voice they trained her to use. Because emotion in a voice is a fingerprint, and they wanted her to have no fingerprints at all. He smiled faintly. She had the most beautiful laugh you ever heard, and they made her spend her life sounding like a machine. Eli sat down on the floor of the booth, his back against the wall. What happened to you? In 1981, the program was shut down. Politics, a new administration, budget cuts, a sense that the war was winding down even though it had years left to run. They closed Choir, and the people who worked there became a problem. Why? Because we knew things. We had heard things. We could decode things that were never supposed to be decoded. Men like me, women like Margaret, we were liabilities. So they gave us a choice. He looked at his own hands. They could bring us in, debrief us, watch us for the rest of our lives. Or we could disappear, new names, new histories, cut every thread to who we'd been. Most of us chose to disappear. It seemed safer. It seemed like freedom. They erased you. They erased us, Walter agreed. Daniel Hantz died in a car accident in 1982, according to the records. There's a death certificate. There's probably a grave somewhere with my name on it and nothing underneath. And Walter Boyd was born fully grown at the age of 29, with a social security number and a credit history and a love of records. He gestured at the walls around them. I bought this shop because it was the only place I could think of where a man who spent his life listening would never seem strange, where I could sit in a quiet room and put on headphones and no one would ask why. And the record? Walter's face darkened. That's what I don't understand. That record was made by Choir, the hidden numbers station inside the song. That was one of ours. A fail-safe. A way to pass a final message if the radio networks ever went down. We pressed a handful of them. They were supposed to be destroyed when the program closed. He held the record up to the light. This one wasn't. And somehow it ended up in Margaret's belongings, sold for $4 in a church parking lot, and now it's sitting in my shop. After 43 years. He set it down. That doesn't happen by accident, Eli. Records don't survive that long and find their way home by chance. Someone wanted it found, or someone made a mistake. And either way, the message inside it is still live. You decoded it, Eli said. It wasn't a question. When you played it the second time, you wrote the numbers in your head. I never stopped being able to, Walter said. That was the gift. That was the curse. What did it say? The old man was quiet for a long time. It said, choir reactivated, survivors compromised, come home or be brought home. The silence that followed was so complete that Eli could hear the click, click, click of the needle still riding the empty groove. That message, Walter said, is dated. Number stations always embed the date in the first sequence. It's a verification protocol. He met the boy's eyes. The date on that message is 3 days ago. What happened next changed everything. It was 1:15 in the afternoon when the car pulled up outside. Eli saw it through the front window, a dark sedan, government plates, the kind of car that was deliberately unremarkable in a way that made it the most remarkable thing on the street. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both in their 40s, both wearing the kind of plain clothes that somehow announced exactly who they were. Wrong for the town. Too neat. Too still. They're here, Eli said. Walter rose from the chair in the booth. He moved slowly, but there was nothing frail in it now. He straightened his cardigan. He smoothed his white hair. And then he walked out to the front of the shop and stood behind the counter, as though he had been waiting for this day his entire life, which Eli realized he had. The 2 agents tried the door, found it locked, and knocked. Walter unlocked it and let them in. The bell above the door chimed, cheerful and absurd. We're closed, Walter said. But I think you knew that. The man held up a badge. Special Agent Reyes, this is Agent Okafor. We're looking for the owner of this establishment. You found him. The woman, Okafor, was scanning the shop the way a soldier scans a room, corners, exits, sightlines. Her eyes settled on the beaded curtain at the back, then on Eli, then on Walter. We received an alert this morning, Reyes said. An audio signature was uploaded to a database, a fragment of a broadcast that's been flagged in our systems for a very long time. The upload traced to a phone connected to this address. He glanced at Eli. You took a video, didn't you? When the record played, Eli's face went hot. Yeah. I posted a clip to show my friends the weird glitch. I didn't. Of course you didn't, Okafor said, not unkindly. Nobody ever does. She turned to Walter. Sir, we'd like you to come with us. We have some questions about how that record came to be in your possession. I'm sure you do, Walter said. But before I go anywhere, I want you to do something. I want you to call your supervisor, and I want you to say one word, and then I want you to tell me how your supervisor reacts. He paused. The word is choir. Reyes frowned. Sir, just do it. Humor an old man. There was a long beat. Then Okafor stepped outside, phone to her ear. Through the window, Eli watched her speak, watched her stop speaking, watched her go very still. When she came back inside, her face had changed. She looked at Walter the way a person looks at a ghost. How do you know that word? She asked quietly. Because I'm one of the voices, Walter said. Or I was. A long time ago, in a place that doesn't exist, I sat in a room and listened to the world. My name was Daniel Hans. You'll find a death certificate that says I died in 1982. It's a lie. Everything about me is a lie except the one thing that matters. He set the record on the counter between them. I can still hear it. I can still read it. And 3 days ago, someone reactivated a program that was supposed to be dead for 43 years. And they sent a message that says the people who built it want their voices back. Reyes and Okafor exchanged a glance. Eli saw something pass between them. Not surprise exactly, but confirmation. The look of two people who had been told a story they didn't believe and had just watched it come true. "Who sent the message?" Okafor asked. "I don't know," Walter said. "But I know who it was sent to. There were 9 of us in choir, the listeners. By now, most are dead. Age, illness, the things that come for everyone. Margaret died last month. That's how this record got loose. As far as I know, I'm the last one who can still decode the old protocols without a machine." He looked at the agent steadily. "Which means that message was sent to me. Someone knows I'm alive. Someone has known for a long time. And the question you should be asking isn't how I know the word choir. The question is, who told you to come here today, and whether they sent you to bring me in, or to make sure I never talk." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Okafor's hand drifted, almost unconsciously, toward her hip. Reyes saw it and put a hand on her arm. "Nobody's making anybody disappear," Reyes said carefully. "We were sent to investigate an audio match. That's all we were told." "That's all you're ever told," Walter said. "That's how it works. You're given a small true thing and sent toward a large false one." He sat down on the stool behind the counter. He suddenly looked his age again, every year of it. "I spent 8 years learning that nobody at the top ever tells the people at the bottom the truth. Not to be cruel. Just because the truth is expensive and lies are free." But that wasn't the full story, because at that moment the second car arrived. Eli saw it first, a black SUV, no plates at all, pulling in behind the agent's sedan. 3 men got out. They did not move like Reyes and Okafor. They moved like the men in Walter's oldest memories, the ones who had come to the windowless building when something needed to be cleaned up. They wore dark suits. They did not knock. Reyes turned, saw them, and his whole posture changed. "Who called them?" he said. "Okafor, did you call them?" "No," she said. And Eli heard the fear in her voice, the real fear, the kind that meant she understood something he didn't. The 3 men reached the door. The first one opened it without asking. The bell chimed. "Agent Reyes," the lead man said pleasantly. "Agent Okafor. Thank you. We'll take it from here. This is now a matter of national security under a directive you don't have clearance to read. You're dismissed. Leave the record." Reyes did not move. "On whose authority?" The man smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "On the authority that doesn't answer questions like that." And that's when Walter Boyd did something that made everyone in the room go silent. He began to read the numbers aloud. He didn't shout. He didn't stand. He simply sat on his stool and spoke, in that flat, dead voice he had learned a lifetime ago, the voice with no fingerprints. He recited the sequence from the record, 3, 7, 9, 2, 6, 4, and then he kept going, into a second sequence that hadn't been on the record at all. Numbers he was pulling from somewhere deeper, from a memory that had been waiting 43 years for exactly this moment. The lead man's smile faltered. "Those are activation codes," the man said. "How do you—" "I wrote some of them," Walter said. "Before your time, before the program had a name you'd recognize. I was reading numbers into a microphone when you were learning to walk." He stopped reciting. The silence rang. "Here's what's going to happen. Agent Reyes is going to take that record and log it as evidence in an open federal investigation with a chain of custody and a case number and a witness." He nodded at Eli. "The boy already uploaded a clip to the internet. It's been seen. It can't be unseen. You can make me disappear. I'm an old man, it would be easy. But you cannot make the record disappear, and you cannot make the question disappear, and that is the only protection any of us have ever had. Witnesses, records, the thing on the internet that can't be deleted." He looked at the lead man with something almost like pity. "You came here to close a loop, but the loop is already open. It opened the moment a 19-year-old kid paid $4 for a dead woman's records." The lead man stared at him for a long, long moment. Then he reached into his jacket. Eli's heart stopped. But the man only pulled out a phone, stepped outside, and made a call. Through the glass, they watched him speak, watched him listen, watched his shoulders change. When he came back in, Something in him had surrendered. "You're Hans," he said, not a question. "I was. They told us Choir's last listener died in '82. The man's voice had lost its smoothness. "I've read the file. I've cited the file. I've built half my career on the assumption that everyone who could decode the old broadcasts was dead." "That was the point," Walter said gently. "We were more useful dead. Dead men don't testify. Dead men don't remember. Dead men don't sit in record shops and hear a song and know exactly what's hiding underneath it." He stood slowly and came around the counter, and the three suited men did not stop him. "But here's the thing nobody told you. The reason they reactivated the program 3 days ago, the reason that message went out, it wasn't to bring the listeners home. It was to find out which of us were still alive, so they could finish the job they started in 1981. He held the man's gaze. "You weren't sent to protect a secret. You were sent to be the last man who heard it before it was buried. They used you the way they used me, the way they used Margaret, the way they use everyone." The lead man's face was gray. "Man, the only reason you're going to walk out of here," Walter continued, "and the only reason that boy and those 2 agents and I are all going to walk out of here, is that the secret isn't a secret anymore. It's a video on the internet and a record in an evidence locker and 4 witnesses who all heard the same thing. You can't unfire that shot." He picked up the record and held it out, not to the suited men, but to Reyes. "Log it, please." Reyes took it. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the lead man did the only thing left to do. He straightened his jacket, and he looked at Walter Boyd, at Daniel Hans, the last voice of Choir, and he gave a small, stiff nod. Not a salute. Something quieter. The acknowledgement of one tired man to another that the game was over and they had both lost it long ago. "For what it's worth," the man said, "I didn't know." "Nobody ever does," Walter said. "That's the whole design." The 3 men left. The SUV pulled away, and the record shop on Delaney Street was suddenly, impossibly quiet again. What do you think happened to Walter after that day? Drop your guess in the comments. And if you believe the people who serve in the shadows deserve to be remembered, subscribe, because the story isn't over. There was one more thing hidden inside that record, and Walter hadn't told anyone yet. Reyes and Okafor stayed for 2 hours. They took Eli's statement. They photographed the record from every angle. They asked Walter questions, careful ones now, the questions of people who had realized they were standing inside something much larger than their orders. Walter answered what he could, and refused what he couldn't, and they let him refuse because something had shifted, and they both knew it. Before they left, Okafor lingered at the door. "My father was in signals," she said quietly. "Navy. He never talked about it. He died not talking about it." She looked at the old man. "Were they all like you? The ones who disappeared?" "They were better than me," Walter said. "Margaret most of all. She read numbers to strangers for 8 years, knowing some of those numbers sent people to their deaths, and some of them saved lives, and never once knowing which was which. That takes a kind of courage I never had. I only listened. She had to speak." Okafor nodded slowly. Then she did something that wasn't in any protocol. She reached across the counter and shook the old man's hand. "Thank you for your service," she said, "even if nobody was ever supposed to know about it." When they were gone, when the lock was turned again, and the shop was empty except for the 2 of them, Eli finally asked the question he'd been holding all afternoon. "You said there was something else, on the record, something you didn't tell them." Walter went to the listening booth. He sat in the single chair, and he gestured for Eli to put on the headphones. "The numbers on that record aren't just an activation message," he said. "There's a second layer. There's always a second layer. That was Margaret's idea, back in the early days. A message hidden inside the message, for the listeners and no one else. You only hear it if you know to slow the run-out groove and listen to the silence." He smiled, and for the first time all day it was a real smile, soft and sad. "Put them on. Slow the platter with your finger. Listen to the part that sounds like nothing." Eli did. He put on the ancient headphones, lowered the needle to the silent groove at the end, and slowed the spinning record with the tip of his finger the way Walter showed him. And there, buried in what should have been silence, so faint he had to hold his breath to hear it, was a voice. A woman's voice, not flat, not mechanical, warm and tired and human. "To whoever finds this," the voice said, "my name is Margaret Vance. I spent my life as a machine so that other people could stay human. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and the program is gone, and maybe it's finally safe to be a person again. I hid this where only one man would ever think to look. Danny, if it's you, and I think it's you, I think it was always going to be you, I want you to know it wasn't wasted. None of it was wasted. We listened so the world could sleep. Now you can rest too. Stop hiding. You've earned your name back. Any name you want. I always thought Daniel suited you." The recording ended. The groove clicked, soft and empty. Eli took off the headphones. His eyes were wet, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Walter, Daniel, sat very still in the chair, his hands folded in his lap, his face lifted slightly toward the framed photograph of the antennas and the empty horizon, the loneliest place on earth, the place where two young people had once spent 8 years listening to the world so it could sleep. "She knew," Eli said. "She knew you'd find it someday." "She always knew things I didn't," Daniel said. "That was Margaret." He rose from the chair. He looked older than he had that morning, and somehow lighter, as though a weight he had carried for 43 years had finally been set down on the floor of a small soundproofed room behind a beaded curtain. In the weeks that followed, things changed, and things stayed the same. The record went into a federal evidence locker, where it remains. The clip Eli posted was viewed 2 million times before anyone in any agency could decide whether to be alarmed, and by then it didn't matter, because 2 million people had already heard the numbers and the tone and the dead flat voice reading codes into the dark. The story got out the way stories get out now, sideways in pieces, impossible to contain. A journalist found a death certificate for a man named Daniel Hontz and started asking why a dead man owned a record shop. A historian found a declassified budget line for a program that had been redacted into a black rectangle for half a century. The truth surfaced the way Walter had always known it would. Not all at once, but slowly, the way a record surfaces from the bottom of a milk crate at a church sale. He never went back to being Daniel, not officially. The paperwork was a nightmare, and he was too old to care about paperwork. But he hung a new photograph in the shop, beside the one of the antennas. It was a picture of Margaret Vance, young, laughing, her head thrown back in a moment of pure joy that no microphone had ever been allowed to capture. He'd found it in the crate, tucked inside the sleeve of the children's record about the singing train, where she must have hidden it, knowing that one day the right person would buy $4 worth of a dead woman's life and bring it home. Eli kept coming in on his lunch breaks. He stopped working at the tax office and started working at the shop, learning the private system of the records, the order that lived only in Walter's head. The old man was teaching it to him, finally writing it down, the way he had never written anything down before. "Why now?" Eli asked him once. "Because some things shouldn't die with the person who knew them," Walter said. "I spent my whole life keeping secrets. Turns out the only thing worth keeping is the part you pass on." The bell above the door still chimed, cheerful and absurd. Customers still came in, flipped through the crates, asked the old man if he had this pressing or that one, and watched in quiet amazement as he found it in under 30 seconds without looking. They thought he was eccentric. They thought the antennas in the photograph were art. They never asked about the woman laughing in the frame beside it, and Walter never explained. But he looked at her every morning while the heaters ticked and the coffee brewed, and sometimes he said good morning, and the shop was warm, and the records waited. And for the first time in 43 years, a man who had spent his life listening for danger simply listened to the music. Have you ever known someone who carried a whole hidden world inside them, and only learned the truth when it was almost too late? Tell their story in the comments, and if you believe that the people history tried to erase still deserve to be remembered, subscribe, because there are more of them out there than you'll ever know. sitting in quiet shops on forgotten streets, listening, waiting, hoping that someday the right person will pull the right record from the crate and finally hear what was hidden underneath. Silence kept them safe. But it was never meant to be the end of the song.